Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. And before we get to our guest here, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Ashley Thompson on the podcast, coming to us all the way from Savannah, Georgia. We have another fellow Georgian on the podcast. She's a WNBF figure pro. She's here to talk about her journey and what that's like for her being a figure pro, and also, the pandemic. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about. We have a lot of ground to cover, but most importantly, she's our current guest. Ashley, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is all mine, but I got to ask first of all, what's the weather like in Georgia today?
It is blooming hot.
So, so what does blooming hot mean for someone from Georgia? Because it might mean something from someone different than Minnesota.
Well, okay, so today is 98 degrees, but it feels like 105.
Oh that is the definition of blooming hot then, I guess. So this might be one of the rare times where in Minnesota we actually have better weather, because it's like upper 70s right now, and it's so with my skin tone, with my just insanely Nordic white skin. I mean, this is the one time where I can go outside and enjoy myself because there's no sun outside, so I won't get burnt to an absolute crisp. But yeah, it's like high 70s. So this is the one time I will actually pat myself on the back today and just realize, hey, I'm having a little bit better weather at least today. But I mean, the weather is one thing that I'm going to do my whole podcast on. It's going to be like 10 hours long about all the winter weather woes. But before we get into that, Ashley, why don't you give us your backstory on what really inspired and what motivated you to get in shape and how that led to where you're currently at right now?
That is always a question that I get very often. So it's very actually a long story, but I can make it pretty short for you.
Oh, you can go as long as you want. This is your podcast. Yeah.
Okay, so many moons ago in high school, I developed an eating disorder. So I was anorexic. So I had anorexia nervosa, and that went with me through college. And I got down to 70 pounds at the age of 21 years old. Um, so, it's one of those things that you look back and you don't know how it happened, but I will honestly say that it was the best thing that ever happened to me now, because I originally went to school to do hair. So I was a cosmetologist. During that time, I got really sick, to the point where I was on my deathbed, very, very sick. Um, I when I finally got the courage to get healthy, which took many years and a lot of prayer and a lot of friends and family, I realized that health and fitness changed my life because it was something that I had to work back up, to be able to fill out my clothes, to be able to have a healthy body weight. In that moment, I knew that I could never take that for granted again. So very many of us take health for granted, and we don't realize that, it doesn't matter what end of the spectrum you're on, whether you're trying to lose weight or gain weight, we are all just trying to find a healthy balance. And for me, once I found that healthy balance, I knew that anything fitness I wanted to pour my life into. So I completely changed my life, stopped doing hair, became a personal trainer, and a few years later became a nutritionist. And then I became a bodybuilder back in 2015. And then 2 years ago, so yeah, 2018, I became a bodybuilding pro, which is a WNBF figure pro. And it all stemmed from being 70 pounds and, realizing that my life could have easily been taken away. So I give my life, honestly, to bodybuilding.
And wow, I mean, that's such a great story. And we have had a lot of people that have suffered through stuff before, and it's really helped inspire them. I mean, it's fascinating how, you go from one end of the spectrum to another end where you go into bodybuilding, and that's just so great because I mean, like my dad told me before, there are a lot of unhealthy addictions, but working out, that's one of the healthy addictions that you can have. So I mean, it's great that you were able to find that. But when you were getting started working out, because I mean, I always say if you're to walk into a gym with 100 people, that's 100 different ways as to how those people got into shape. I mean, I honestly want to rename this podcast into trial and error because that's really the theme that I like to talk about the most. But when you're getting started working out, I mean, it is hard to figure out what works best for your body because everyone has so many different results. And, it really is, like I said, just a lot of trial and error. But what was that process like for you when you first got started working out, sort of figuring out what worked best for your body?
Oh, wow. So that honestly was something that I didn't just dive right into lifting weights or, bodybuilding. So when I was actually cleared to work out again, for the longest time I couldn't work out because I couldn't get any smaller. I was not allowed to work out. I was not allowed to burn calories in any way. So when I became a healthy weight, it was kind of like starting from scratch. All my life I had been a gymnast and a cheerleader, so I didn't have to really worry about how I was going to get my activity in for the day. But as I got older, and then I had the eating disorder, then overcame that. It was kind of like, where do I go now? You know, how do I have a healthy lifestyle now that I'm not cheering, now that I'm not a gymnast, and now that I'm not anorexic? What do I do? So I actually picked up running. So I became a runner. I got really, really good at it, honestly. And I know that a lot of people, either you love it or you hate it. And I became really, passionate about running. So that was something that started me into the, fitness field. But it's one of those things that it is trial and error because you can't just up and go run 5 miles. It doesn't work that way. So I had to ease my way into it. But once I realized that, okay, I like running, but I want some tone. I want some muscle. I think muscle is sexy, especially on women. I was, you know, so small for so long that I wanted something different. And so I went in and I YouTubed videos. I would always look at Arnold. I would look up any kind of motivation to start from working out. And I would just kind of pick up and put up things, the way my body felt best. I knew that it didn't matter what everyone else was doing. I had to find what worked for me. And starting small, doing my research, understanding the muscle groups, understanding, what kind of frame that I had, what kind of time that I had, what kind of, nutrition I had in my body currently. That's where I started. And I knew that it was a great starting point. I didn't expect to be perfect overnight or anything like that, but it was one of those things that it made me feel good. I liked lifting weights and it made me feel good.
Well, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum where I hate running more than anything else. I'm one of those people, yes, where I hate it, but hey, during this quarantine, I am, just I'm going on like 100-minute walks just because I'm so bored, but then I got to watch a movie. But here's the thing, I've run out of movies to watch. So now I'm kind of just in this sort of limbo where I don't know really what to do. But yeah, that's so great. And yeah, it like I said, I mean, we have heard so many guests have so many different stories when it comes to figuring out, what works best for them that really there is not one way that I could recommend for anyone. And that's the tricky thing about it is that so many people just want that one fix where they're like, okay, just give me that one thing that I know is going to help me the most. And it's like, I can I can give you tips that might help you out, but I'm not guaranteeing that this is not going to be like the be all end all thing. So that's one thing that I find so fascinating about this life. But I love to talk genetics too on this podcast because so many people don't realize that, especially in this day and age with Instagram where everyone's online and everyone's saying, oh my God, I want his arms, I want her abs, I want their back. You can only be the best version of yourself. That was one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn in my entire life when I was very, very young, sorry, because I just, I was always like, oh my God, why can't I look like them? But it's, hey, you don't know how they got to that level. You don't know how they maintain it. And a lot of it's genetics too. But I always say on top of that, whenever someone first gets started working out, they always have that one body part that really, really takes off that they don't have to train as much. And they always have that one body part that really, really lags behind it. They have to train to oblivion to get it to catch up to everything else. What were those body parts for you when you were getting started?
Oh, hands down, my biceps just grew with me looking at them. I can say the word biceps and they would grow. Uh,
Give us a gun show. Let's see the arms then.
I was gonna say I'm prepping for a show, so I'm kind of small right now, but I don't know if you can
Yeah,
see it.
that's holy crap. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
And then my legs. I feel like every time that I would compete, they would say, "We want your legs bigger. We want your legs bigger. We want your legs bigger." And it was just one of those things. It was like beating a dead horse. So that was an area I always and still have to work really hard on.
Well, hey, I would love to have the arm thing happen to me, but for me, it's my back, and then it's also my legs are also. I'm 6'3", so that's one thing that I don't think is ever really gonna be, that good for me. But yeah, I mean, I love asking that because we've had such a wide variety of answers, and that really does help too. But one thing that I really think doesn't isn't talked about as much as it should be when it comes to the health and fitness lifestyle is the fact that nutrition plays such a hard fact. I mean, so many people don't understand that that's 80 to 90% of the journey. And, that's one of the hardest things that people have to accept, I think, is that they don't understand that. And I mean, I still have friends to this day who, God bless them, they still say, though, hey, I can work out, 5 times a week and I can eat whatever I want. And, I'll still, and I was like, well, yeah, because you're 24, 25 right now, but wait and, give it like 10 years from now and then see what happens. But what were some of the bigger nutritional changes that you made when you started to give bodybuilding a try? Because I know just like putting on some weight when you were recovering, that's a whole different thing. But what were some of the nutritional changes that you had to make when you first realized, like, hey, I'm going to need to probably be eating a lot more since I'm going to be packing on some muscle?
Absolutely. So for me, eating once I became healthy, eating's never been a problem. Girl likes to eat. But the biggest change for me to actually really like work towards putting on the muscle that I wanted was eating smaller meals more frequently. And that was an art that took me a minute to really understand because like I said, I enjoy eating, but I was so used to eating a big breakfast, a big lunch, and a big dinner. So for me, adjusting to those small meals, I eat 6 times a day. And, for me, that works because now I have trained my body to be hungry like every 3 hours. And when I say hungry, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to eat. So that was honestly the biggest thing for me that I had to really change in order to put on the muscle that I wanted was portion size and timing. It's everything.
Oh, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times too. I mean, if you get that nutrition down and those portion sizes down, I mean, yeah, you are good to go. That is, I mean, life and death for a lot of competitors too when it comes down to it. But I always love to say, I mean, when it comes to the general public, they don't understand that, like I was telling you before, they think that, your whole journey is basically, oh, you just work out a lot and then you go on stage and you pose, where they don't understand that that is 1% of the life. And I always say, 95% of the general public couldn't even get in shape to be able to go on a prep because you already need to be in such great shape before you go on a prep. But I mean, once you're on a prep, everything just becomes so scientific. I mean, it is just so, I mean, I can't even describe it because I've never been on one myself, but just from all the stories that I've heard, what is that experience like for you when you first went on your first prep, and how has that evolved as your career's gone on? Have your preps gotten easier or have they gotten harder?
My first show, I was really just doing it to knock it off my bucket list. Something that I just wanted to do to say that I could do. Also, my first prep, when it was over, I swore that I would never do that again. But I went on to win that show, my very first show, and I figured, okay, all right, it was 12 weeks of hell, but it paid off. So after that first initial show, it really just pulled me in. But I'll never forget thinking, like, this is how I go out. I'm going to die, like, on this prep. This is like, these people are crazy. But at the same time, to watch my body change in just in 12 weeks, I was mind blown. So as I've gotten better over the years, I'm not going to say that it's gotten easier because I honestly feel like every time I prep for a show, some kind of catastrophe happens and something just literally rocks my world every time I'm prepping for a show. And I'm just like, really? But so it doesn't get easier in that aspect. It's always hard, but the way I see it now, it's worth it. Anything worth it is not going to come easy. Um, so I will say that I've gotten more used to it. It hasn't gotten easier, but I've become a better, a better bodybuilder because of it, because I've learned discipline, I've learned patience in the world of bodybuilding. And so I will say that, you know, all in all, yes, it does get easier.
Well,
But
you did.
pandemic.
Oh, well, yeah, that too. Well, that we'll get into that soon. But I mean, you said before that like you were a runner, but what is your relationship like with cardio during preps? Because I mean, that might be the one time where you're like, okay, this cardio thing, I'm not the biggest fan of it now.
The funny thing is I guess it's really not that funny after all, but I'm a very successful figure pro. However, I'm a very petite figure pro. I'm only 5'2", 110 pounds on a good day. So for me, I'm super lucky because my cardio maybe, 10 minutes 3 times a day, if that. If that, because the goal during competing is to hold on to as much, muscle mass. So I almost laugh telling you this because it's nothing that I can honestly complain about when I prep for a show. It's something that I can really just kind of throw in people's face, like, yeah, I only have to do, 10 minutes of cardio.
I was gonna say, yeah, we've had a few hundred bodybuilders on, and you're one of the handful that are like, yeah, my cardio isn't that bad. So count your blessings. I'll just say that because yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, cardio, yeah, you can't even get me started on. I mean, I'm probably gonna do a whole podcast on that too. But one thing that I found is probably the hardest thing for all these competitors, which I would have never guessed in a million years before I started this podcast, is the posing. I mean, so many people talk about how it's harder than your working out, it's harder than your nutrition. I like to compare it now to being a perfect driver, where you can be a great driver, you can never be a perfect driver. You can be a great poser, you can never be a perfect poser. It's always ever evolving. What has your experience with posing been like?
It came very natural for me. I'm now a posing coach. Like I teach posing clinics, all throughout, Savannah. But for me, I don't know, how natural or how long it's been that natural to me. But like when my first show, I look back and I'm like, oh, I look a little awkward. But at the same time, each show, like my muscles and my body has grown. So when you learn to pose, you learn to pose, against your body. So for me, as my body has changed, it's each year I have to change up the posing a little bit because my lats are bigger or my shoulders are bigger. Um, for me, it came very natural, and it's one of those things that yes, if you pose correctly, you will wake up the next morning thinking you got hit by a train, and that's good. That's how you want to feel. It's super hard. You can have the best body on stage, but if you lack, that beautiful presentation of a good poser, it's going to count against you.
I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that, where I mean, yeah, you could have the best body in the world, and if you don't know how to pose, good luck. That's just unfortunately how it goes. But that, since you are a posing coach, I mean, I'd love to ask this. What do you think is one thing that your clients struggle with the most at first when it comes to posing?
Definitely flaring their lats. That's one thing that most people are like, they try to find that perfect lat spread. And, sometimes it's because their lats aren't developed, so they don't necessarily have lats to spread. So of course it feels awkward for them because they don't have that muscle, yet, or they're working on it, or it's not as big. But that is the number one thing with my clients that I typically will have to adjust big time.
Well, that's one thing too that we've heard, especially for females. I mean, it can take years before you develop that. How long did it take you before you really finally were able to flare those lats? Was it something that came easier for you?
It is something that came easier for me because I think with me being a gymnast, I had a strong back. So and a cheerleader as well. So I was very top heavy. So lifting people up and whatnot. So for me, my back grows super quickly. So I was very, blessed to get lats pretty quickly in the business of bodybuilding.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing that I think really does help separate too is just that lat spread too. But also one of the things that isn't talked about that I think should be talked about is wearing those damn high heels, because I always say, isn't it hard enough to pose without those high heels on, and then they got to make you wear those high heels too? How much more difficult does that make that for you?
Just imagine a new baby deer trying to walk for the first time. I, like I said, I'm a personal trainer, so I go to work in tennis shoes and my hair in a ponytail. So, homegirl, when she puts on high heels, I mean, it's some serious stuff. So, it's all about finding that elegance and class while you're trying to showcase all your hard work. And it's tough because, at that moment you are trying to contort your body and show your muscles in the best lighting. But yeah, you have to do it on, 6-inch heels. And it's just kind of like, I don't walk in high heels on a normal day. I definitely don't want to do it in a bikini in front of 100,000 whatever people and be judged for it. But needless to say, I got the smallest heel size that you could possibly get so I could learn to really maneuver that. So most girls will get the 6-inch or 8-inch. I got the 4-inch, and I struggle with the 4-inch.
I mean, yeah, I was like, don't these athletes go through enough already? And you got to make them wear those heels. But knowing that you said that, like you said, your upper body really does develop quickly. Do you found that that's been a struggle for you being a figure competitor? Where I mean, like you don't have to do like the bodybuilding poses, like the physique poses, or the. Do you find that that's difficult then to sort of maintain that balance? Because bodybuilding is all a balancing act. People don't. That's one thing that also the general public doesn't get to is that I mean, it's like you're not just gonna have the biggest biceps or the biggest legs. Everything has to be proportioned. That's one thing that I think the general public where I have so many guys that I know they're like, oh, I could compete tomorrow or whatever. It's like, really? Because your legs are like my legs. They're like an inch thick and they're so it's not going to work. But has that been a difficulty for you sort of making sure that your body is proportionate when you're walking on that stage?
Oh, absolutely. That is, as a figure competitor, that there are different rounds that you get judged, and that is actually one of the rounds is symmetry. And, you know, it is tough for me because I do develop, very quickly on my upper body, and my lower body just, I mean, I can lift and squat and do heavy things with my legs, but they're not, they just stay the same. So for me, I have to be very careful about, when I get to a certain point, not overdoing my upper body workouts so they do stay in tune with my lower body, because my lower body's just not going to get much bigger, unfortunately, and so it's one of those things that I love lifting so much. If I'm not careful, I'll walk out with pumpkin shoulders, and which to me looks great, but it doesn't match with my legs. So I do have to be careful.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I always said I could inject pure muscle into like my legs or calves and they wouldn't gain an ounce. I mean, I don't know how that's possible, but that just is unfortunate too with it. But when it comes to this bodybuilding shows and everything like that, what is that feeling like for you when you get to walk up on that stage and show off all that work that you've worked months upon months on?
There's nothing better. I am a little bit of a control freak. So bodybuilding is one thing I feel is completely in my control. Um, in other areas of my life, unfortunately, I tend to be a control freak. I just want everything to go just like I want it to. But with bodybuilding, I'm like, you know what? I know exactly what I'm putting into my body. I know exactly what I'm doing at the gym. So therefore, I am in control with the outcome. So when I get to go on the stage, it does. It feels like, you know what? This is me. This is what I've been doing. Most people don't understand the sport and don't really appreciate the sport. But for me, being on that stage, being surrounded by people who actually do understand the sport, there's no better feeling. Absolutely no better feeling.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine what that must be like, especially after all the hard work that goes into that prep. Just be like, oh my god, it's finally done, and it's time to really enjoy yourself. But when it comes to winning your pro card, because for so many people out there, I like to make a quick explanation. I mean, for so many of these athletes, winning their pro card is the highlight of their career, just because that is the affirmation that all that hard work that they put into the gym has finally come to fruition for all these reasons. And what was that experience like for you when they announced your name and you realized, oh my god, I'm a pro now?
I watch that video every year when I'm getting ready for a show because it still gives me chills. And that year I was number 13, which scared me to death because number 13, everyone's, I'm kind of superstitious. So I was like, oh, this does not sound good at all.
Was there a black cat walking across the stage?
I was kind of waiting for one. I was just, that's how nervous I was to have that number. But ever since then, which was 2 years ago, that number is my absolute favorite. And whenever I hear that number, I still get that feeling of when I won overall in 2018.
I mean that's great too. Yeah, I'm I'm not as superstitious. I'm a little stitious, like Michael Scott from The Office says. But like, yeah, if I got 13 too, I'd be like, okay, this is interesting. Let's see how this turns out. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's definitely something too. But also when it comes down to, I mean, just after the show, what is your go-to post-show meal?
hot wings and donuts.
Any specific type of donut?
Okay, so I wish I could just say, one specific flavor that you can get anywhere, but I can't because it comes from a little mom and pop shop in Bluffton, South Carolina called All Joy. And they are called Cinnamon Swirl, and it's like a big honey bun donut the size of your head. I get that, and then I get ones with Reese's on top. It's just nothing better. And I love hot wings, so that's my favorite cheat meal and treat meal.
That's why I hate asking that question, because I'm gonna start drooling myself then thinking about all of that. But I mean, everyone already knows this, but I was mention it for you. I mean, Five Guys. That's my go-to. That's the. I mean, I always said I would rent out a Five Guys for that night and just be like, I'm paying until I either throw up, pass out, or die. But either way, I'm gonna get my money's worth. But one of the other myths and stereotypes that I love to bring up, because I mean, so many people don't understand that look that you guys put on stage, that is not a sustainable look. I think so many people have that myth where they just see maybe competition photos, or they just see photos on Instagram pages, or there's shows like Biggest Loser where people go on, they lose hundreds of pounds, and some of them are able to maintain that weight. They just assume that, oh yeah, if they can do it, I mean, bodybuilders, with the amount of hard work that they put into, you must be able to look like that, year round. And I mean, I've had some people that were shocked when they saw bodybuilders off season. They're like, oh wow, they never even looked like they competed a day in their life. And then it's like, well, yeah, what do you expect, that they go around, just all tanned up, 24/7? And we've heard some stories of people that have, tried to do that, and obviously it's not good for your health. And spoiler alert, everyone, they're not at their healthiest when they walk up on that stage. I mean, I always said, if you were to do like a strength contest on that stage, you would be fascinated at what some of the results would be, just because you are not at your strongest. But what was that like for you when you first realized that, like, hey, this body that I'm presenting on stage, it's not a sustainable look? And has that gotten easier for you to accept it as your career's gone on?
Absolutely. So there is an actual definition of how, and it's called post show blues. And the way you feel after a show, and I'm not just talking about like immediately, but like the next day, because the week leading up to a show, you don't have water. Like you're depleted, you're dehydrated. So, yes, naturally, when you get done with the show, you're going to drink water again. So, your body's going to fill back up with water. So, the very next morning, you automatically don't have the abs anymore and you aren't as vascular. And this is just within, a few hours. Mentally, it can really mess with you because you're on this high of looking so amazing, winning your pro card, or whatever it may be. Then you wake up and you're just like, oh my gosh, what happened? So it's really tough. But no, I you cannot maintain that body. Um, I've tried, and not that I have tried because it's because you want to look that way, but as time has gone on over the years, it's not healthy. It's so, so unhealthy. And, you know, the part of me loving bodybuilding and health and fitness is because I appreciate my body, not because I want to torment it. So it's a sport. You need to love your body, but if you walk around dehydrated and, starving yourself, you don't really love your body. And so to me, it's just kind of like a double edged sword. Like, you've got to respect your body. And in order for you to be in tip top shape, you have to put on some weight in off season.
I always say it's like starting your own business. You got to put on weight if you want to put on muscle. You got to spend money if you want to make money. I mean, those two, I mean, obviously they just go hand in hand, but we were talking about this before we started recording as well. Another myth and stereotype. I mean, so many women still suffer from this, where if they were to walk into the gym and they were to pick up one weight, they're afraid that they're going to put on, 50 pounds of muscle overnight. And first of all, if I had that type of self-confidence, I would be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company by now. I mean, it's like, give me some of that. But obviously, I mean, it is not true. And when you were getting started, I mean, it was for, obviously, you're like, give me some size, let me put on something. But being that you're a personal trainer, I bet you still hear that all the time. How do you like to respond to that?
All the time. I get, most women, or not, I don't want to say most women, but a lot of women would look at me and be like, and actually I've had this happen before. I've had a client be like, I want to put on muscle, but I don't want to look like you. And you're just kind of like, well, thank you. And they don't mean anything, but they don't mean harm by it. But at the same time, I didn't. This didn't happen overnight.
It's blissful ignorance, basically. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I've learned to kind of just brush that off. But if it were easy to put on muscle, my legs would be huge, but they are not. And it makes me super sad. I wish I had tree trunk quads, but I do not. So it's not easy at all to put on, muscle. If it's one of those things that you've got to, what usually when I have to explain that to women is the more muscle you have, the more fat you burn. So when they hear that, they're like, oh, okay, well then, yeah, I do want to put on muscle. So it's all about who you're talking to and how you've got to reword it.
Yeah. I mean, I always said if I gain as much muscle in my legs as easy as I did in my upper body, yeah, I wouldn't be able to walk through doors basically then. So, yeah, unfortunately, and I always tell the story of when I was in college, one of my friends was talking about, oh, she wants to get in shape, kind of like how I was, but she didn't want to, get too big. And I said, look, the amount of weight that because she had a really heavy purse. I don't know if she had like a dead sorority sister in there or something like that, but her purse weighed, like at least 10, 15 pounds. And I was like, okay, you're lugging that thing around 24/7 and you haven't gained an ounce of muscle from doing that. And then she's like, oh yeah, you're right. So it's just all about busting that. And I always say once people first get started, working out, it's so hard to not keep up with it. But I always say two of my favorite questions to ask all the health and fitness guests that I have on. For the first one, I mean, there were so many positive things that happened to me when I started, working out and getting bigger and stronger. But the one negative thing is that you're going to get asked to move a lot of people's furniture. You're going to get asked to open a lot of pickle jars or bottled water, anything that's sealed on tight. You're the go to strength person. I mean, because of the coronavirus, I moved back in with my parents just because I'm on furlough right now. So basically, whenever they come home with groceries, I basically have to lift the car into the driveway and carrying the groceries for them. Has that been a similar experience with you where people just take one look at you, or your friends like know that you're in shape, or they just say, "Oh, we'll let Ashley handle it. Ashley can do it."
Yeah, ever since I started, I guess I can't say all my life, but ever since I started bodybuilding, yes, absolutely. Like I am the security guard for all of my girlfriends, and I'm okay with that. You know, it's one of those things. It's all about embracing what you're good at, and I'm good at bodybuilding. I'm good at lifting things up and putting them down. And my niece looks at me like I'm just the coolest, strongest person in the world. So she always wants me to lift her up and do these things and blah, 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 all these activities that require me to use my body. So, yes, I have dealt with that, you know, but again, like I said, I don't mind. It's who I am. And like I said, I enjoy lifting things.
Yeah. And that's great. Well, I always said for me, it's a double edged sword because being 6'3" and a guy, I could have zero muscle at all, and everyone would be like, "Oh, hey, tall guy, come and help me with it." And I was at that age even like a year ago, and still to this day, where I have friends moving out, and they're just like, "Oh, you want to come help me move my furniture and stuff like this?" Like, well, I don't want to, but I'll do it just because I'm a good person. But it's you're paying for dinner basically. That's how we settle it. But I mean, let's be completely honest. You are not the average looking woman. Like you said, if you were to walk out in public dressed the way that you're dressed right now, I mean, people get fascinated by it. You might get some stares just because, humans, we are naturally a curious breed where, I mean, if we see something that's not of the norm, we're just curious by it. But what has that experience been like for you? Because we hear so many times of you're basically like a mini celebrity, basically, where I mean, when it comes to getting the looks and stuff, how have you dealt with that?
It's been tough. Um, of course, as women, we love attention. I mean, what woman doesn't like attention? But at the same time, it hasn't always been the best attention. Sometimes I do get the ugly stare. Sometimes I do get the, mean girl look. But I have to. I'm like you. I'm a nice person. I have a genuine heart. So a lot of times people do only see me for my body. So it's tough because you do have to bring a little bit more to the table when it comes to, spending time with me or, getting to know me. Like I'm more than my physique. And unfortunately, we live in such a superficial world. Like you said, getting on Instagram is just kind of it's very it gives me anxiety, just thinking about it, just getting on and like comparing our bodies and whatnot. So when you get on, social media, unfortunately, what you do see is my body. But I love when people look past that part of me and actually get to know me for me. So it is something that I struggle with because I immediately kind of, when I get to know someone, I'm like, I kind of set these boundaries of like, hey, I'm a really cool person. I'm funny. I'm smart. I, love Disney and just things like that. So for me, it's something that I'm still having to, kind of maneuver around is getting the looks.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. When I was in college, I'd go to bars and I'd have drunk girls sometimes come up and just start feeling my arms without me asking. But let's be honest, this was Ryan Johnson, the college years, so I'd pump it up for them a couple of times. The college years are a little bit different. They're kind of they're an anomaly, but hey, so I understand that. But my favorite question to ask, the men and the women that I have on the podcast, for the men they go through this enough, but for the women, it's just so much more. Is the clothing options. I mean, we have heard, yep, see, we get that reaction every single time where, I mean, if you have big, broad shoulders, dresses aren't your best friend. Jeans are another thing that we hear of all the time. Where, I mean, if you have a big lower body and a smaller waist, good luck finding jeans that fit you. But what has that been like for you? And I mean, what are some, clothing options that you have figured out work best for you? Because I always say, too, you basically have to have two wardrobes, your prep wardrobe and your off-season wardrobe as well.
If one of one more of my girlfriends gets married and makes me wear a bridesmaid's dress that does not fit my lats, I'm I'm gonna scream because I've had to always get my dress tailored because of my back. It's these dresses are very, designed a certain way, and there's no giving on, bridesmaids dresses. They are, designed to a T. So my lats, I mean, it's because I have a small waist and I don't have a lower body, but I have these huge lats. So it's like this big Y shape. And so I try to stay away from dresses as much as I can. I'm a sports bra, t-shirt kind of girl. That works for me. Anything stretchy and spandex, I'm all game for.
Yeah. Hey, and that's one thing that we've heard about, all the time too, that I totally agree with. But obviously, this coronavirus has, changed every single aspect of our lives. I mean, I cannot imagine a time, at least in my life, it's affected, me as much as it has. How have you been dealing with this pandemic, and how has it affected, your working out and your fitness journey?
So I was 2 weeks out from a show in
Oh
March
God.
before everything just collapsed and the world started ending. Um, so talk about devastated. I had put in months of hard work. I was starving, depleted, all to find out that this show was not going to happen. So, needless to say, I knew that it would be rescheduled, but I didn't know when. So it was kind of like, okay, do I go in off season? Do I stay in, where I'm at right now? My whole summer was like a mind game because I didn't know when the show would be, but I did know that I was going to compete in this show. I knew that much. I just didn't know when. So when they announced the actual date, I think the promoter announced it back in June that it would be in September. I was all game. It was tough because all the gyms weren't open yet. Some of them were, and for me personally, I'll drive to a gym that's open. Even if it doesn't matter how far out of my way, I'm gonna work out when I can. So I was very fortunate that I had friends that had gym equipment. I didn't miss a beat, with the corona. Um, I, however, it did mentally, mess me up as far as I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to eat. I don't know, you know, do I put on size? Do I not put on size? It was tough, but when it came to lifting weights, I didn't miss it. I didn't miss a beat.
Well, and that's just so important too. And I mean, going off that, I mean, being a personal trainer, you understand this too. Where I mean, I always say this is the time if people want to get in shape where they can get in shape because I mean, a lot of people have that excuse, and I bet you've heard this a billion times is, oh, I just don't have the time. I'm sorry. I just don't. If you use that excuse now, I don't know what you have going on in your life because everyone seems to have so much more free time. But what advice do you have for someone who is just looking to first get started, working out, just to be able to do it, especially during this pandemic where, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people aren't going to want to go to the gyms now just because they still have that fear of, like, oh, they may be open, but, I could still maybe, catch something there. But what advice do you have for someone just looking to get started? Because I always say just to have that base so when things really do start to open up or there's a vaccine or whatever happens, when people feel more comfortable going to gyms, just having that base will really really help you when it makes that transition. But what advice would you have for that person?
It really doesn't take much to get. I mean, it all depends, of course, on your personal goals. But if someone is wanting to just get started on just getting better at their health, small 10-minute walks do me a world of difference. I take probably 3 10-minute walks a day just to kind of clear my head. But as far as like lifting weights, to me, like at you can get so much accomplished with a lightweight, a medium weight, and a heavyweight. Just have 3 sets of dumbbells. That's all you need. You can do so much with just so little, and people don't realize that. But at the same time, I understand that because I am a trainer and I know certain exercises. So I get it. Most people are like, okay, so now that I have these dumbbells, what do I do with them? There's so much material out there, especially during this time. Also, I during this time I'm an online trainer, so I've put together programs and stuff like that. But there's so much out there that can help you get started in the comfort of your living room. You don't need much.
No, so did you like to do a lot of time and retention in your training, it sounds like?
I do. I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I typically will do my trainings.
Yeah. So one thing that I love to talk about with time under tension too is that a lot of people, if you were to mention, mind to muscle connection, most people are like, "What? Like, what does that even mean?" But I mean, it's been established on here. But one thing that people who understand that, I mean, it's taken people years upon years to develop that, or it's really a hard thing to develop. How long into your journey before you really started to develop that mind to muscle connection? Because it takes people a while.
It didn't take me long, but I think a lot of that was because I was active, growing up. And as far as cheerleading, I was a competitive cheerleader, so I was a base, so I used my arms so much. So muscle memory is a beautiful thing. Your muscles really remember previous, movements that it has, done in the past, and the muscle that it has built in the past. It really bounced back pretty fast. So for me, that mind to muscle, it didn't take long for me at all.
And that's great too, because I mean, we've heard that wide variety of answers as well. But if someone were to walk up to you and say, Ashley, we made the decision, you can change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding and everyone would go along with it, what would be one thing that you'd like to see changed?
That's a tough question because, well, I would say no heels.
Yep.
um, but I understand that that's just figure. I can, but for because muscle, I mean, because bodybuilders and men's physique, they don't have to wear heels, of course. So I would probably say politics. It can get pretty political in certain shows that you compete in about who who's friends with who, what color you are, what race you are, what I mean, what religion. I mean, it could. People don't understand, but and trust me, they're not all that way. But you can get into certain shows where it's all.
We've heard stories like that too, and yeah, I unfortunately I think that just goes along with a lot of things in life too, and it's infected bodybuilding too. But I who it's unfortunate, but yeah, if they could definitely change that, I would say that as well. But Ashley, if we were to talk to you a year from today, where'd you like to be at in your bodybuilding journey? Where'd you like to be at just in your overall life? What are some goals that you'd like to have achieved if we were to talk a year from today?
Well, so the main reason why this show was so adamant that I competed in it was because I want to hang up my heels for a little bit. So I don't want to say retire for good, but I'm 30 years old, and not that that's old by any means, but for the past 5 years, I've solely focused on bodybuilding. You know, that I look back and I've enjoyed those years. But for me, I'm in school for physical therapy. So a year from now, I would love to be thriving in that. Still healthy, still lifting weights. Um, I want children one day. Um, I want to bring my body to a healthy state so I can do that because, a bodybuilder's body isn't exactly their most fertile body. So for me personally, and this is just me dreaming big because I'm not married, I'm not dating, but I would like to be in a place next year where I can see myself doing those things.
And that's just obviously that's just so great, and I'm glad that you have those goals too. And I honestly, we wish you nothing but the best when it comes to that. And again, everyone, go and give Ashley a follow on her Instagram page down below. I highly recommend it. And is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to before we wrap things up?
I mean, there's so many people, my friends, my amazing friends. I have, you know, great friends that have always supported me in this sport. It's not easy for them to understand why I can't be at certain events during this time and why I can't do certain things. Um, Definitely my family. My family, they don't necessarily understand my love for this sport, but they don't care. They're there every year, every show, screaming my name, screaming my number. And, they're Team Ashley. They're all the way. They're Team Ashley. So that would definitely, I have so many friends and so many families, so I'll just keep it at that. But I love them all.
And that's great because I mean, we've heard so many stories on how, having that support system makes things so much easier. But again, Ashley, we cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story. I mean, it was so great to talk to you. And like I said, we wish you nothing but the best. And everyone, I'll leave a link to all of her stuff down below if anyone's interested in that. But again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't think of a better way to end it. Can you give us another front double buy and everyone can just be inspired to go and work out their arms because it's like Jesus.
Absolutely. I'm actually hitting them today.
Oh God. All right, everyone. Well, now we got to go and train arms now. So actually, what does an arm day look like for you then when you're training arms? Because that's one thing that I think a lot of the males that might watch this podcast are like, okay, how does she get her arms like that? I want to get arms like that.
Like I said earlier, biceps are something that really grows super fast on me. So I usually will train those with my back. So anytime you're working your back, you're also working your biceps. So I kind of do like a double whammy with them. So working your biceps with your back, and then also your biceps with your biceps. So back and biceps day works every time.
Yeah, well, that's actually one thing that I do myself and it does have its results. But again, you guys go and give Ashley a follow. I'll leave a link to all of her stuff down below. And this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.